Good afternoon. Welcome to this session on Pity the Billionaire, a book that I understand that you have all read, which is great. Our guest, I'm Robert Viscusi. I'm the director of the Wolf Institute, and I'm also the head of the committee that organized this visit. Mr. Frank will be with us all week. He's giving a lecture, particularly, I call to your attention in this program, which is on your chairs. He's giving a lecture at 5:30 on Wednesday in Tanger Auditorium called Against Creativity. And he's taking part in a public conversation with the New York Times columnist and Nobel Prize winner, Paul Krugman, at 12:30 on Thursday in Whitman Auditorium. That ought to be a memorable event. I mean, they'll all be memorable events, but that one will be a big memorable event, I think. We invited Mr. Frank because he is a remarkably interesting, almost I would say unique practitioner of the art of political analysis. There are plenty of political analysts, but he has a gift for asking questions that other people don't think of as interesting until he asks them. He's written a great deal. He's been a journalist. He had his own magazine, the Baffler, which ran for what, 12 years?
It's still going. I'm not in charge of it anymore.
You're not running it anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. And he wrote for Harper's for a long time, and he writes now for Salon.com, and you can find him there. Although now you're taking a hiatus, is that right?
I'm writing another book.
He's writing another book.
The world needs more books.
By you, yes, absolutely. I won't go through all of his books, but his first book is called What's the Matter with Kansas? And it asks the really interesting question, how could it be that the poorest county in Kansas, which is going some, right, in 2000, voted 80% for the Republican candidate for president? Since all of us in our generation grew up with the iron principle that people vote their pocketbooks, and poor people and people who work for bosses don't vote for Republicans because the Republican Party is the party of the bosses. Well, apparently that all changed, and none of us quite figured out what was going on. I didn't even begin to understand it until I read this book. It really startled me when I read it. And most of his books have similar effects. So I think you're going to find this conversation very interesting. Do you have anything you want to say at this point?
I'm going to turn the floor over to our guest.
Okay.
Get to the mic, please.
I said, no, I'm going to turn the floor over to our guest. What do you guys think? Good idea, right?
Yes.
Me?
Okay.
You want me to talk into the microphone?
You are the guest. Yes.
All right. Okay, so what I'm actually going to talk about are all the things I forgot to mention to the last class, and now I've had time to reflect, and I've remembered them all, and no, I'm just kidding. So, Pity the Billionaire. You guys have read Pity the Billionaire, is that right? So I can see that. It's a little bit embarrassing. Oh, you've got the UK edition. That has a spelling error on the spine. Yeah, they spelled the title wrong.
How do they spell it?
It's more common than you'd think, the spelling error on the cover of a book. But that's not really what I came here to talk about. So the whole idea of Pity the Billionaire was, I am drawn to irony and paradox, and the idea of hard times sparking a conservative protest movement is what I wrote about this time around. And I'll tell you about the genesis of the book, where I was telling the last class about it, and we'll just keep going a little further. So I was writing a column for the Wall Street Journal, and I was an opinion columnist for them, and I was their house liberal. I was the one, I was going to be the liberal on their op-ed page. In fact, I was the liberal on their op-ed page. And when they hired me, they said, they hired me right before Obama was elected in 2008, right before the financial crisis. Sorry, right after it? Oh, hell, I don't remember anymore. Right before. And they said to me, we think that a liberal age is starting. We think we're entering a liberal period. that the pendulum has swung so far one way and is now ready to swing the other way. And lots of people agreed with that assessment at the time. When Obama won in this sweeping way, when the George Bush administration had resulted in all of these different catastrophes, the last one being the worst, the financial crisis, everything falling apart. And you had respected historians, magazine journalists, everybody saying that the conservative era was over. What's his name? Sean Wilentz wrote an article in U.S. News, I think, saying that the age of Reagan had finally come to an end. Everyone seemed to agree on this, that this is what had happened. And I wondered, as President Obama took office and the things were getting worse and worse, I wondered when the protest movement would show up, because among other things, the period of American history that I know the best probably is the 1930s. And there, it's like I said in What's the Matter with Kansas, it's like setting a match to a puddle of gasoline. You know what's going to happen when the economy falls apart. People are going to behave in a certain way. They're going to react in a certain way. They're going to protest. You're going to see strikes. You're going to see massive mobilization of labor. You're going to see all kinds of public protest. And it took a while after the financial crisis for this sort of thing to materialize. But I remember when it did, a friend of mine called me up and said, "Your protest is here." And he said, "It's tomorrow down in Lafayette Park, it's across the street from the White House, down in Washington." And I went, and it was the first Tea Party rally. It was about a week after, what's that character's name, gave his famous rant on CNBC. Who am I thinking of? It's in there. Come on, you remember it, though. You remember it from having watched it. Say what? No, it wasn't Glenn. Glenn Beck came later. Yeah, Rick Santelli, yeah. And this was the first Tea Party protest, and I went down there and wrote about it for the Wall Street Journal, and I made fun of it. I didn't take it seriously, and the reason I didn't was because it was such obviously a put on. It was a lot of sort of conservative movement types in Washington, D.C. They had worn their suits and ties to protest, carrying their signs with their tie on. There were a lot of lobbyists there. It was a classic example of what we call astroturf, a fake grassroots movement. This was the very first one. And so I had my fun and laughed at them. But I'll be damned if it didn't catch on. And next thing you know, this movement that seemed very fake to me when I went to the first one, within a very short period of time had sparked something real. And you had people all over the country out in the park screaming through bullhorns and yelling about stuff. And so I went to a bunch more of them. I went to a lot of Tea Party rallies, and they even started having conventions, and I went to those too. And what I eventually saw, and this is very interesting, was this movement more or less deliberately reenacting protest movements of the past, but changing the language very slightly. And doing this in all sorts of different ways. The whole imagery of the Boston Tea Party. My favorite people have always, in American history, always gone back to the Boston Tea Party, but my favorite example of this is in the 30s, there was something in Iowa called the Farm Holiday Association, and it was farmers going on strike. It was a farmers' union, and they would, among other things, make it very hard for a banker to foreclose on a house. They would show up in great numbers at the foreclosure proceeding and basically prevent it from happening by whatever means. And they also went on strike, and they would surround the towns in Iowa or Wisconsin, Iowa or Nebraska or wherever they were, and prevent farmers from bringing their produce to market. So you'd drive to the picket line in a truck filled with milk, and the strikers would pitch the milk overboard. And a reporter from some big Eastern magazine went out and talked to them and asked them why they were doing this and why they thought it was okay to do this. And the farmer said, "Of course it's okay to do this. It's like the Boston Tea Party. We're just doing exactly the same thing as our ancestors did in 1773." And that struck me, when you started seeing these protesters nowadays doing this, but with the message entirely reversed. it wasn't that they were going to stop foreclosure proceedings. Is that they wanted people to get foreclosed on more and more and more. And I remember that the kind of protest signs that they would carry. They'd say things like, "Your mortgage is not my problem." The real mean-spirited kind of things, where the idea was they wanted their neighbor to go down. They wanted their neighbor to pay for the good times that they had enjoyed. It was kind of the opposite of a hard times protest movement, using all the same language and imagery and all that sort of thing, of course. But I'll tell you something else. That's the kind of narrative in a nutshell. But there was also something about them that really hooked me. And I remember at that very first protest, I saw a guy carrying a sign. God, what did the sign say? Oh yeah, "Let the failures fail." And he had the logo of Citigroup and AIG and a bunch of these other banks. "Let the failures fail." And I was like, yeah, that was a message that really resonated for me. I thought, exactly right. So this was something that was both repugnant to me, but also kind of attractive. And I suspect that a lot of other Americans felt the same way about it, that it was the only thing going. It was pretty much the only protest. 2 years later, you had Occupy. But for the time being, these guys were it. They had the monopoly. And a lot of aspects of it, people were enraged in those days. The bank bailouts, that was just obscene. I think of my people that I know back in Kansas could not believe that was happening, that our government rode to the rescue of investment banks. That those guys didn't have to suffer the failure, right? Everybody else does when their business fails, and these guys are going to get bailed out. It was inconceivable to so many people, and they wanted a way to express it. Okay, that's the book. You've read it. What do you think? What should we talk about? What aspect of it?
Well, just for you to, so this class is American Dream and Reality, right? Heavy emphasis on reality.
God, yeah.
So we've read Seamus Khan's Privilege.
I haven't read that.
Oh, it's an interesting book. Alfred Lubrano's Limbo. I don't know if you're familiar with that. Okay, so.
And I think I read a lot of books, but I haven't read those.
One of the things the students in this class, Limbo is about straddlers who grow up in the blue-collar world and want to ascend into the white-collar world, and actually nobody had written about the loss they feel in that transition and learning a new language and not having a lot of time with their family and friends. Privilege is about St. Paul's School, where Seamus Khan went.
That's where F. Scott Fitzgerald went.
Yeah, adolescent, making a...
he's my hero, by the way. You'd think my hero would be like some left-winger. No. So, Scott Fitzgerald.
One of the things I think the students know is I've been reading all your work for a very long time, and anytime I can find a way to get it in a class, Conquest of Cool was one of them. I've assigned What's the Matter with Kansas. Actually, I've assigned everything but One Market Under God.
Yeah, you got to get on that.
I got to get on that one. But at any rate, since you were coming, I said, well, why don't we? I haven't read Pity the Billionaire myself yet, and why don't we read your latest?
Okay, American Dream and Reality is a great way of putting it.
This for the students is one of the books that's most focused on the politics of American Dream and Reality, and I love the fact that the crash results in...
Well, the Wall Street bailout is really as close as we come to. That was a shocking moment for me. I believed what the government said. We need to do this, or there'll be a worldwide economic catastrophe. I believed it. Everyone believed it, and they're probably right. They were probably right, but still, this was as close to a violation of the basic American rules as that's what we sensed at the time as it's possible to come. And so this book was one of the ways for me to explore why I felt that way about it. And one of the things that I learned when I was researching this book is that there's a lot of different ways to bail out a bank. There's a lot of ways to you can unwind the bank's positions and put them out of business in an orderly manner without making sure everybody gets their bonus paid and the business stays in operation, and they get, propping them right back up and letting them go back to doing what they were. And it's actually been done a number of times in American history where we have treated these banks in a different manner. And I'm thinking specifically of the Roosevelt administration, where they did, well, we had bailouts in the Hoover administration where they were very similar to what we did under Bush and Obama. And then Roosevelt, and they were very unpopular, just like they were this time around. And Roosevelt campaigned against them. And when Roosevelt got into office, he didn't stop bailing out the banks. He did it differently. What he would do is say, okay, well, all the officers of your bank are fired. Here, we're bailing you out, and all the officers are gone. I'm appointing new officers. He personally didn't do it. He had an agency that did it, of course. In some cases, they would put banks completely out of business and start new ones. They did this in a number of cities. Basically completely restructured the financial system of this country in a way that is almost unimaginable for us now. You want to talk about American dream and reality, there's a certain class of Americans who regarded that as an unbelievable imposition. They couldn't, that this was happening was, back in the 30s was, what's happened to the country that we grew up in? How is this possible for the government to step in and put a bank out of business? And fire the executives and do all these sorts of things. By the way, Obama did that with General Motors. They fired the management there. But with the banks, he had a different, what would you say, level of scrutiny? No, a different attitude altogether. These guys, it's a funny thing. I'm changing subjects pretty dramatically here, but Obama and company have always regarded the bankers as brother experts. These are people that you go to for advice. These are not like the chairman of GM. That's a guy you can fire. But the chairman of JP Morgan? No way. You don't even make them, okay, one of the disputes that came up at the time was we bailed these people out, paying 100 cents on the, remember the AIG bailout? We paid their creditors 100 cents on the dollar. We paid them 100%. They got everything that they were owed on paper. When we bail out banks in other countries, which the IMF does all the time, nobody ever gets 100%. They all have to swallow some kind of, they call it a haircut. They all have to take a haircut. Everybody has to get, 50 cents on the dollar or something like that. Whatever it is. And they have to make all sorts of concessions to get that. In this case, they got everything and they made no concessions. Amazing. And so my American dream is as funny as a sort of Roosevelt dream. And I'm watching this and I'm like, oh my God, it's the reverse of what the bankers thought in the 1930s. I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is happening in my country. Another aspect of the American dream and the banks, the Andrew Jackson administration. We never think about this anymore. I've been reading, we were talking earlier about Arthur Schlesinger. He's one of the older generation of historians that like to write for a general audience, and was in fact an advisor to President Kennedy. Had a hand in practical politics as well, and he wrote a history of the Andrew Jackson administration. Nobody remembers the good side of Andrew Jackson anymore. We all remember the terrible things Andrew Jackson did, the Trail of Tears and stuff like that. But he also was involved in this enormous fight with what was called the Bank of the United States. It was a private version of the Federal Reserve. It was like having a Federal Reserve, only it was controlled by shareholders and a CEO, and didn't have to answer to the United States, to the U.S. government. Could just do whatever the hell they wanted. And these guys were fantastically arrogant. And Jackson finally took them on, and when he did, they deliberately caused a depression. They called in their loans all over America to cause make business go into a nosedive, and they did it. They successfully brought on a recession, and it was an amazing period. And God, I talk too much, and I'm just wandering at this point. I should shut up. Okay. Oh, well, that story goes nowhere. I was just thinking of American dream and reality. But the Jacksonian dream is, in some ways, we don't remember where it comes from anymore. But Andrew Jackson is so fundamental to who we are. They had a saying in those days, equal rights for all, special privileges for none. And this is really the beginning of the idea of that every citizen gets to vote. Before Jackson, there were all these property qualifications. To vote, you had to have a certain amount of wealth. And Jackson is the beginning of, no, it's just complete democracy. Okay, they didn't let women vote. In most places, they didn't let black people vote. But this is the beginning of it, where they're just like, okay, if you're a citizen, you vote.
Universal white male suffrage.
That's right. That's Jackson. And it's a short walk from there to where we are today. But it was also a time of suspicion of expertise. It was a time of democracy with the lowercase d across the board, sort of like the French Revolution without the guillotine. It was a period very much like that, and that's sort of always in the back of our minds when we talk about the American dream. That we are all equal at the end of the day. And you don't have, the planter up on the hill who gets to, cast 80 votes, or something like that.
This group of students are very chatty, and they like to engage.
Oh, okay. You guys chat.
Engage the books that they've read, so maybe we could open it up to them. I have a question
Okay.
that I'd like to put on the table, but we can leave it for later. And that's the question of agency
Mm-hmm.
in your work, and particularly in this book. Some people appear to have a lot of agency, whereas
Other people have none.
other people have none. So at some point after other people in the room, maybe you can...
Okay, that's a really interesting question, but it's also the people's idea of their own agency,
Yes, okay, that's right.
which is you find this here, but you find it all over the place. And in What's the Matter with Kansas, I spent a lot of that book writing about conservative movement culture. And one of the things that conservative writers often imagine about themselves is that they are lacking in agency, that they can't do anything, they can't act. But liberals are able to pull the strings and call the shots and control the world. And whenever they talk about this, they always talk about Hollywood celebrities. It's like Hollywood celebrities are people. And say it again.
And the liberal media.
And the liberal media. That's right. But Hollywood celebrities are people endowed with. They're extra human. They're greater than human. They're able to do all kinds of things and to act, and people listen to them. But we average citizens have no voice at all. And this is a very common fantasy. You encounter it all the time, and it's not. I mean, there's a certain amount of truth to it. I mean, average people. Look, it's a country of 300 million people. A single person doesn't have a whole lot of say in the system. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm stopping there, but yeah, I'm just exhausted.
Are you?
Yeah, but I'm ready to go.
Then let's somebody
Okay.
get him re-energized out.
Yes, ma'am.
Maggie.
So this book was written in 2012, so it's already been 3 years
Yep.
since writing. Kind of political field has obviously changed because it's always evolving. Do you think the Tea Party's heyday is kind of past, and do you think they'll have any influence on the presidential election next year?
Well, Ted Cruz, the first one out the gate,
Mm-hmm.
Tea Party hero. But I think, the Tea Party movement has passed. They don't have their protests in the parks anymore. But I would also say that the Tea Party movement accomplished its goal, and there's no need for it anymore. There's two things that it did that are very important. One is it rescued the Republican brand. It's sometimes hard to remember what things were like in 2008, but the Republican Party looked pretty bad. Thanks to the George Bush presidency, the financial crisis, and nobody remembers this anymore, all the Abramoff scandals, all of these, this incredible bribery scandal going on. We don't remember now, but there were all of these, because the financial crisis has wiped the slate clean memory-wise, but there were all of these scandals in D.C., bribery scandals, conflict of interest scandals, revolving door scandals. Do you guys even remember Duke Cunningham? Do you know who this was? He was selling earmarks. He was a congressman from California, and he went to prison. And then you had Jack Abramoff, and you had remember the Bush people. They would draw people from industry, put them in government. They would write a law, then immediately. Bush's prescription drug coverage. This is the most famous one. They got a bunch of people from the pharmaceutical companies. They wrote the law. got the law passed, and then went back to the pharmaceutical industry. The most extraordinary thing. But there were dozens of scandals like this. And so the Republican brand was really tarnished, badly tarnished in 2008. And they needed a different place to start their counterattack. Their counterattack against Obama. And the great thing about this name, the Tea Party, it's kind of confusing. Is it a party? Is it a movement? What is it? Is it a political party? And remember, there was all this confusion at the time. Are they a third party? Are they somewhere in between the two parties? Are they just Republicans? Are there some Democrats there too? It was. Yes, that's right, and it invoked something very noble, and so it was a great place to. So they moved outside their own party to start their comeback, which was genius. The other thing that it did, well, genius. I mean, it's just practical politics. It's just a good move. They're just playing the game. This is something after living in D.C., I've really realized about the conservative movement. They're very, very good at playing the game. Whereas you get a guy like Barack Obama, who is obviously a genius personally, very intelligent man personally. And this is typical of Democrats. You have these very smart guys, Clinton, Jimmy Carter, all these guys, very smart, can't play the game, or they play the game and they lose, right? But the other thing that the Tea Party movement did was they stole the populist thunder. They took it away from its rightful owners, and they were right off the bat. They faked a populist movement, and it caught on. And you had a sort of other left wing attempts, most notably Occupy Wall Street, that never really went anywhere. And a lot of that is because these guys were out there right away with a fake movement that you could sign up for, and it was ginned up deliberately. More or less, as I said, I went to that first one, but it caught on, and so they managed to capture public anger at Wall Street, which is an amazing thing when you think about it. This is the party, that did Wall Street so many favors for Wall Street. Democrats did favors for them too, but these guys did fantastic service to Wall Street, and then managed to cast themselves as the opponents of it. And that was, we don't really understand the historical impact of that because we can't really see any other way that it might have played out now. But you just look back at how things worked in the 1930s, where you got real reform of Wall Street, and you had enormous frustration at the grassroots level. And you can start to see what a difference this thing made. So its moment has come and gone. But that's as it should be. It's served its purpose, and it's now an outmoded vehicle. There's no need for it anymore.
You go first. You go first.
Yeah.
You talk about the basically stealing the Democrats' populist thunder. Part of your conclusion, I believe, in What's the Matter with Kansas was you talk about the sort of liberal elite rejecting, I think you call it the Archie Bunker types, organized labor. And you also talk about that in Chapter 10, Technocrats.
Yeah.
And I'm just, do you put just as much blame on sort of the,
the Democrats?
Things for not trying to go after the labor vote, for not trying to prevent the massive de-industrialization. In the grand scheme of things, yes, I do. So, not as much blame. I mean, this is actually what I'm working on right now. I'm working on a project right now about the Democrats and their culpability in all of these things. And, I'm pretty liberal. You might know this. You might have guessed. I'm pretty liberal. Those of us who are pretty liberal are often told by the Democratic Party to just, keep your mouth shut because the other side's worse. And indeed they are. Nobody wants a presidency like George W. Bush all over again. But the Democrats have a lot to answer for as well. And I've been pretty critical of Barack Obama, but the one that really drives me crazy is Bill Clinton. And I've been doing a lot of research on the Clinton administration, and we can go back to Carter as well. But let's focus on Clinton for the moment because a lot of us remember him. And I've been going back over the great deeds of his administration, and that they were
NAFTA, big prison roundup with the crime bill of 1994, welfare reform, then nothing for a couple of years, and then you had deregulation of investment banking. And it's like that's an awful record. That's a disastrous record for if you're the party that's supposed to care about middle class people, ordinary people. And I've been wondering about why the Democrats don't care, and part of it is that they regard people, working class people, as they always say to themselves they've got nowhere else to go. There's a common saying in Washington D.C. You often say this about members of your own coalition. They've got nowhere else to go.
You also point to the fundraising.
Yeah, the fundraising is part of it, but I don't think that's the entire story. I mean, look, there's beginning with the Clinton administration, Democrats discovered Wall Street and discovered how much money they could raise if they changed their tune. Bill Clinton came to office as a populist, denouncing Wall Street, talking about the 1%, talking about inequality. All of these things sounded great in 1992. There was a recession underway. He left office as the great champion of Wall Street. As his Secretary of the Treasury, Bob Rubin and Larry Summers. He's the toast of the Hamptons. He's the CEOs of America have never done better than they did under him. The Nasdaq hit 5,000. It was a great time. And Barack Obama continued that. Barack Obama, by the way, the first Democrat to outraise a Republican. He outraised John McCain, and not just in general, but on Wall Street specifically. I think Romney beat him in 2012. Of course, Romney beat him, but in 2008, that's the first time that ever happened. I mean, Republicans, when I was growing up, they always had the money, but Democrats had the mass, mobilization, the grassroots support. That was how politics was supposed to work. And at some point, Democrats figured, well, those people are the members of our coalition. It's not like they're going to go vote for the Republican. And what I've tried to point out to them many, many times in all of these books is that, yes, those people will go to the Republicans if you give them things like the Tea Party movement, if you give them this kind of diet of really high octane fake populism. Yeah, they will. And it's not Democrats in Washington. By the way, I live in Washington. It's one of the most annoying places in the world. Democrats believe, not Democrats, not all, but the sort of official organs of the Democratic, more or less official organs of the Democratic Party, certain kinds of consensus journalists and consensus magazines and newspapers, basically think the Democrats have a lock on the Electoral College from here to eternity, and there's nothing they can do to screw it up. If Hillary gets the nomination, Hillary will be president. Whoever they choose will be the next president. They think they can't possibly screw this up. And the funny thing is, they can. they can screw it up. And there's so many levels of what's the word I'm looking for? There's so many levels of misunderstanding and bad advice that the Democrats get that I'm just scratching the surface here. But I think that I don't think they're equally responsible for where they are, but I think they deserve a big part of the blame. I'm sorry, they deserve a lot of the blame. I'm writing a whole book about exactly what blame they do deserve. And I think in particular, Clinton has a lot to answer for, in some ways worse than Clinton did things that no Republican could ever have done. Welfare reform. No Republican could ever have got that. The Republicans couldn't get NAFTA. George Bush Sr. couldn't get NAFTA. Clinton got that for him, got that for them. Another example, Glass-Steagall, of course. A Republican could never have overturned Glass-Steagall. The Democrats would have fought tooth and nail. All of his great achievements were things that no Republican could ever have achieved.
Could we blame maybe the way campaigns are financed?
That's part of it. That's part of it. They answer to money the same as Republicans, but there's a different element here, and this one is a little bit confusing, but. Political scientists talk about sort of realignments and how the coalitions of the parties change over time. And you have this demographic group is Republican and this demographic group is Democratic. And in the years that I've been alive, the white working class has gone from being Democratic to Republican, and the professional class,
this is the most emphatic shift of them all. This one it's bizarre, has gone from being the most Republican group in America when I was born to being today the most Democratic group in America. And you look at this is the group that gets what they want, basically. They are the first among equals in the Democratic coalition. Everybody else has to sort of, fall in line, but the professional class gets what they want. And to make a long story short, they don't really care about workers. They just don't. They care about expertise. They care about consensus. They care about bipartisanship. That's a big one for them. A guy like Barack Obama, this is a perfect president for them. And he's a good president. A guy like Bill Clinton, that was a perfect president in their mind. And someone like Harry Truman, on the other hand, who didn't go to college, this is like unimaginably awful. Okay, I'm stopping talking. Your turn.
Yeah, I mean, to build on that, that was like one of the things that I noticed in the book that struck me the most. Like, where you were talking about like this populist movement building out of, like, I think that the reason that they were able to capitalize so much is because idealistic language is employed like so much, like freedom and like the way they refer to the market as like some sort of natural divine order of existence, and like I think that definitely played a part. I guess that was where I keyed in on the book the most. And now that you're saying that, it kind of makes sense to me, because if you look at the progress in learning as far as degrees, how many professionals now, like now in a technological world, you need a higher level of education to be a professional.
Yes.
So I'm guessing that might have to do with, because you were talking about how a lot of the
another aspect to it. Okay, we're living in a time of unbelievable inequality. This is something that's just in the course of my lifetime that's hard to believe. We'll talk about the numbers and how startling that is later on, but what's the Democratic solution to that? Have you ever thought about this? What's the solution? Go to college. If only everybody got a college degree, the answer is always education. Now, why is it? You can see how that's not going to work. If everybody has a college degree, it's just going to be the same system. Only everyone will be that much more deeper in debt, and But it is flattering to them because you take a guy like Bill Clinton, who really believed that was the answer to everything. Bill Clinton was a Rhodes Scholar. Education had saved his life. He was born in Arkansas. They weren't exactly a poor family, but they were his prospects in Arkansas were very limited. And here he is. He's plucked from out of Arkansas. He goes to Georgetown University, becomes a Rhodes Scholar, goes to Yale Law School, and the doors of the world open up for him because of education. And this is true with so many Democrats that you meet in Washington. And this is certainly the leadership of the party. Barack Obama, same deal. And not only that, he becomes a professor at the University of Chicago. And for these people, education is what explains themselves. This is how they understand themselves. Everything is as a result of education. And so they naturally project that onto the world time and time again. And insist on understanding all of these different problems through that prism, even when it's obviously not the solution. Can I tell you one thing about inequality that'll blow your mind? So the year I was born in 1965, and the richest man in the world in 1965 was this oil baron, J. Paul Getty. He was worth $2 billion. Nowadays, you have hedge fund managers that make that much in a single year, and that's just one. There's so many. Well, hell, when I was born, we had neighbors who were union members living in the suburbs, right? My dad is an engineer, white collar, works at an engineering firm. And the neighbors work at the GM plant. And we all lived on the same block. And today that's just, inconceivable. That would never happen now.
You were also saying, if I hear you correctly, that it isn't just that the working class switched to the Republican, but it's also that the Democrats lost interest in it.
Yes.
And I'm sure that's a very complicated subject. I don't understand, for example, what role racial relations play in this. The white working class and African Americans have been pitted against one another
Right.
in popular discourse.
Yeah.
And the Democratic Party has not wanted to be associated with the white working class because they thought of it as kind of déclassé even to entertain these opinions, even if in fact they were based upon perfectly sensible motives of economic competition and rejection.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that I think that the white working class, that what's happened, and that has happened, they've shifted over to the Republican Party, and I don't think that that's, I think that's something that the Democrats could have fought and could have resisted, and they could have still appealed to those guys and still win those guys over. And one of the ways that they could have done that was by making it easier to join a labor union, because one thing that we know, even with white working class men, who are this group that has shifted very dramatically to the Republican Party, if you take that same individual and put them in a labor union, they tend to vote Democratic. Yeah. And they tend to stay loyal. I mean, I hang around with these guys all the time. They're very frustrated, but they still identify as Democrats. And the Democrats haven't done that. They've let the labor movement die. They don't really care that it's going. They get out there and they every 4 years they come around and ask for money, and they want these guys to go door to door for them or whatever it is, drive people to the polls, but they don't give them the time of day legislatively. You think? I'll give you some examples. Card check was was labor's number one demand of Obama. And he had promised it, he'd promised them he'd get it. And he even voted for it in the Senate when he had been a U.S. Senator, but then he let it die as president. He didn't even try. And the Republicans opposed it, of course, but they could have found they could have found a version of it and got it through. There's no doubt in my mind. And because it's not a priority for him. They have nowhere else to go. He also, at the end of the day, and by the way, Clinton did the same thing. And before him, Carter did the same thing. They all came into office with enormous support from organized labor, and in each case, labor had like their one bill, and it's always something to make it easier to join a union. You guys might know this or might not. It's very difficult to join a labor union in America nowadays. It's very difficult to form a labor union, I should say. It's almost impossible. And every time the Democrat has basically shown no interest in getting it done. Why is that? I don't think it's just the money, because labor puts everything behind these guys. I think it's, and I know Wall Street has more and all that sort of thing, but I also think it's because Democrats, first of all, these guys have nowhere else to go. That's what they figure. And second of all, they don't sympathize with these guys. At the end of the day, these guys are something different than what they are. The leading Democrats are from a certain social stratum. They are professionals, and they look at labor as something to be tolerated, but certainly not something that they're sympathetic with. And I was going to give you an example now. It's NAFTA, of course. This is okay. So NAFTA is, for people in organized labor, is the great sort of disaster moment. It was the free trade treaty with Mexico. And when it was being debated, I remember I was so angry at the time. The way it was debated was there's this utter contempt for people who were against NAFTA. And the term of art that they used at the time was it's a no-brainer. You go back and, well, Google won't do it, but if you do a LexisNexis search, you'll come across this term, no-brainer. And this is what everyone was saying. This is a no-brainer. Of course you want free trade. Free trade's the greatest thing in the world. Bill Clinton was pushing it. He was going to get it passed through Congress with Republicans and then a few Democratic votes that he would lean on. And he did. And it has proven to be, they said, NAFTA will give us, hundreds of thousands of jobs in America as we export everything to Mexico, and they'll become a great market for our products. And of course, it worked exactly the opposite way. You know this, right? It's been a complete disaster. Instead, all it did, if you go back and look at the treaty itself, it's just written so that Mexico can't nationalize foreign property. So back in the 30s, Mexico had nationalized the oil industry, and NAFTA is written so that they can't ever do that again. So now you can go down there and build your factory right across the border, and they can't take it away from you. In fact, they can't do anything to you. And there's all sorts of other ways in which they can't mess with your corporate stuff, and that's what NAFTA allowed. And the results are utterly predictable. It's deindustrialization here, and it's the ruination of their farmer class, because then you have American agribusiness all of our stuff going on there. They can't protect their farmers anymore, and boom, it's a disaster for just about everyone except for a handful of people. And so the people that supported this treaty are proved completely wrong. But if you go, you look at what they say about the next one. They're doing another one. It's a no-brainer. We have the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Of course you want free trade. Yeah.
I'm sorry, from the class who's had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see back there. I saw this guy here.
Michael first and then to you. I'm sorry. Thanks.
Good afternoon. My name is Michael Bavalsky. Thank you, Mr. Frank, for taking the time to speak to us here at Brooklyn College. My question is like this. Towards the end of your book, you seem to present a rather pessimistic and dismal view of what this country's future holds.
Yeah.
A view of which you are, quote, fairly certain.
Yeah.
And you write, every problem that the editorials fret about today will get worse. Inequality, yes. Global warming, financial bubbles.
Hey, I'm right, though.
And you don't really have much here about global warming, but somehow that makes its way into your conclusion in the enumeration of problems that will get worse.
Yeah.
My question is, what concrete actions do you propose to alleviate these problems, to prevent them from getting worse?
Okay, next question. Well, global warming is a tough one, but inequality, I know what to do about that. Look, at the end of the day, you could probably do something about global warming in the same way. You make it into some kind of public works program, and you align the countries, the interests of working people with that rather than with, cranking out gas guzzling SUVs or something like that. There's a way that this can be done. The problem of inequality. We talk about this as though it was something that God Himself is making happen to us. There's nothing, that the market is unappeasable and unchangeable. And even Thomas Piketty, the French economist that has written about this more than anyone else, basically presents it as an equation. This is going to happen, and I don't think it's that simple. I think that it's something that can be easily resisted and reversed, even. And one of the first things I would do is make it easy to join a labor union. That would, I think, change the inequality picture immediately. A handful of other things would also help. An estate tax, for example. A couple of other things, but yeah. I think these things. But look, am I pessimistic? Yes, I am pessimistic. I'm deeply pessimistic. I'm sorry, and I don't. I don't like to go there. I have children and everything, and I worry about it all the time. But I'm trying to stay optimistic. Look at this beautiful weather. It's springtime in Brooklyn. Yes, over here.
Yeah, I know the question I'm going to ask you is probably going to be a little bit off subject, but I wanted to ask you that because during the Clinton administration, they signed, Congress voted to add China in the WTO.
Yeah.
Since China joined the WTO, America has lost 5 million manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
And most of it went to China. Now they're talking about Trans-Pacific partnerships.
Yeah.
Everybody should say enough is enough. They're talking about we should get more jobs.
Yeah.
It's like more jobs. That's maybe not. Now they're willing to try another thing, but with the Trans-Pacific partnership, like the corporation are gonna have more power over the government.
See, you know that.
I know.
But so in Washington, there's when you talk about this with people, that it's as the consensus is already formed, and everybody knows what the answer is. When the question is free trade, everybody knows what the answer is, and the answer is that more trade is always better. And there's who Tom Friedman is, a New York Times columnist. So there was an interview, and you can find this online. This one's kind of amusing, where he's doing an interview with someone, and it was about one of the free trade deals. I forget which one. A couple of years back, and he said, I don't even know. I don't even need to know what's in it. I just hear the words free trade, and I'm for it. And it's like, oh my God, some journalist, he's not even looking. But that's very typical. By the way, he's one of my neighbors. I live in Bethesda, which is a suburb. He lives right near me. But that's a very typical attitude for Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is a very wealthy city. It's a city with an enormous number of PhDs, very highly educated. This is the kind of city that, you talk about what's happened to American jobs and American manufacturing, and that might hurt, that might sting in a place like Brooklyn or a place like Cleveland or Buffalo or something like that. But Washington, D.C., man, it is boom times. And, I mean, things barely paused during the Great Recession. This is a city that is massively prosperous, and they look around. These people look around at this city, and they're like, "What are the ingredients that it takes to make people successful like we're successful?" And it's everybody has to have a good education, everybody has to have a PhD, everybody has to have a master's degree or whatever it is, and and a lot of and then everything will be hunky dory. And they really do think like this. They think that they are a model that other cities, like, you also have the national government here. That never really enters into that conversation. But they think that free trade is how I said in the Clinton years, they used to always say it's a no-brainer. And it turns out the ones who were saying no-brainer were the ones who were wrong. That's what always gets me. But they still say that. It's not even something that is worth thinking about. They all know it's right. That when Obama talks about what he's going to do, he's going to fight the Republicans on this, that, and the other. But he's going to align. He's going to align with them to get the Trans-Pacific Partnership passed. By the way, almost everything we know about it is because of leaked documents from Edward Snowden. Did you know this? It's basically unknown. Aside from that, isn't that on the agenda right now? I believe it is. Yeah. I hear that bell ringing. Does that mean it's time to go? Time for beer?
Are you all right? We have another 10.
I'm just kidding. Of course I am.
Yeah, I just have a question in regard to lobbyists. I mean, we have thousands of lobbyists in Washington right now that are trying to get, a lot of our public officials, trying to get them passing bills and stuff like that for banks and for Wall Street and stuff like that. And many people would say that they're a huge problem. They're a huge reason for the banking crisis. They're a huge problem. And they're a huge reason for why we are in our current state. And one of the reasons why so little has been really done about it from a legislative point of view. What would be a cure to that problem?
Of lobbyists?
Yeah, I mean, the huge amount that we have now, especially from the banks and Wall Street and stuff like that.
Well, you know how earlier I said that everything was getting worse?
Yes.
Well, they pass laws to regulate lobbying every now and then. Like, you have to register as a lobbyist, and you have to do this and you have to do that, and you can't spend as much as. Oh, funny anecdote. Okay, funny anecdote. So, I moved to D.C. right before the Abramoff scandal broke, and there was a whole hidden economy of lobbying that didn't become known really until later. There are all these restaurants that were supported by lobbyists, expense account restaurants. Abramoff owned his own restaurant, and he would, take politicians there, and they wouldn't have to pay. And there were other lobbyists. There was a guy called Tommy Boggs that owned a steakhouse. There was a bunch of lobbyists that owned restaurants, and there were other restaurants that were entirely supported by lobbyists. And when they were building the new stadium for the Washington baseball team, the Nationals they're called, they built a whole series of luxury levels. You talk about inequality. The skybox is a big milestone on the road to inequality. When they started building luxury into sports arenas, but the Washington Nationals baseball stadium is actually built with layer on layer of ascending luxury, and the final most luxurious layer is like the lobbyist area, and that's the one right behind home plate. And if you're ever watching one of their games, they have these armchairs. These guys are sitting in these great big armchairs, and the whole thing was designed so that lobbyists could bring their friends and their clients and whoever else, bring them to the baseball game, and they could sit, because Jack Abramoff was, as we now know, had skyboxes at all the different sporting venues around Washington. And all lobbyists do this. And then right after they built the stadium, they passed a law that doesn't allow them to do this anymore. And it's really hurt the team. Now they can't. Who's going to sit in those chairs? These really fancy, the really fancy seating that they built just for the lobbyists. I love that they built it into the architecture of the stadium. The lobbyists were built into it. Well, look, they back to your question. They try to regulate this all the time. And it's difficult. Lobbying is basically, some people say it's protected by the Constitution, but it's also been actually against the law from time to time. Various states outlawed it. It was used to be regarded as, by the way, a book you all might want to read. There was a woman who ran for governor of your state called Zephyr Teachout. wrote this book called Corruption in America, and she has a very interesting take on corruption. Our current definition, and when I say our current definition, I mean the Supreme Court's definition of political corruption is quid pro quo. I give you money, you give me political favor. And her argument is that that's way too limited, that corruption is actually a much vaster category, and that we need to actually just forbid entire categories of behavior, or else, even though it's not straight up quid pro quo vote buying. And one of the things that she pointed out in this, and I was kind of embarrassed that I didn't know it already, lobbying was illegal in many states. It was regarded as sort of infamous, the idea that you could hire somebody to go and trade on their influence with a member of Congress to get something done. That was even the Supreme Court didn't like that. It was a very suspicious idea. And regarded as a bad thing, only up until very recently, and now we have come to expect it. The problem is it's unless you forbid the entire category, it's almost impossible to regulate it, because you're talking about people who are just friends with other people, and they trade on that friendship. And the really good lobbyists don't register as lobbyists. To register as a lobbyist, you have to spend X amount of hours doing it. And so they're just like, well, I don't spend that many hours doing it, so I'm not registering as a lobbyist. So they get around the law. Similar with campaign finance. It was difficult to regulate, and now we've basically given up on it. Citizens United is that's the little poison pill that we're all, By the way, one of the guys we were talking about interviews that I had done, and I'm forgetting who told me this, but one of the conservatives that I talked to said that the problem is not that there's too much money in politics. I'm sorry, this is not someone I interviewed. This is Tom DeLay in his memoirs. The problem is not that there's too much money in politics. The problem is that there's not enough money in politics. This is a conservative Republican speaking, and he says, we've got to get more money. People have to take politics seriously, but and realize that you have to spend on it, which is a funny way of putting it. And what I took from that is that this movement wants the political function of this country to act like a market. You buy it. You bid against someone else for results. And it's they're getting their way. That's the road that we're on. And so we pass little things here and there to stop, egregious offenses like the Abramoff thing. And Barack Obama said, I'm not going to have any lobbyists in my administration. Then he had quite a number of lobbyists, as it turned out. But you have things like that, and then it just, then the flood resumes, And I think Zephyr Teachout is right that until you take these very broad steps against that corruption, very broadly defined, there's nothing you can do about it. Unfortunately, we seem to be going in the other direction. But one of the things I loved about her book was that she pointed out all of these moments in American history where people did outlaw behavior that we think of as routine today, corrupt behavior. Gift giving, for example. There's also anti-corruption, what would you call it, rules in the Constitution itself. But they aren't things that we think of as corruption anymore. Yes.
Unless there's another student. I want to get back to your book since they read it.
Oh, okay.
One of the things we've been doing this semester is peeling back that onion on uncritical faith in the meritocracy,
There you go.
The uncritical faith in
but that's profound.
work,
You
right?
see what you just said is very profound. Faith in the meritocracy. In some ways, people like me sit around and say, what does the Democratic Party stand for anymore? Once upon a time we said we know what they stand for. It's for a middle class. It's for a strong, healthy middle class. Freedom plus groceries is one of so someone once said back in the 1930s. And now it stands for something different. And if I had to put a single word on it, that's what I'd say it was. It stands for the meritocracy. The idea that the smartest should rule, and when the smartest do rule, then everything is going to be great. And so you've got Bill Clinton in there, Rhodes Scholar. You've got Barack Obama, professor from the University of Chicago, and there's a very telling line in the Obama administration where it wasn't Obama himself, but his press secretary, and they were asking him why they reacted to the financial crisis and the recession in the way that they did, and why they didn't do, I think it was the subject was the stimulus, why they didn't pour so much more money into it. And he said there was not a single mainstream Wall Street economist who was saying that at the time. And I thought that was really telling, that they regarded Wall Street as not only mainstream, but as experts that was worth that was worth going to. And that is entirely the failure of the Obama administration in one sentence, that he went to the wrong experts. Who were the guys that he thought were the experts? It's the perps. That's the experts. That's the fatal mistake.
Along with that, we've been peeling away the layers of the self-made American, right? The myth of that. And the other thing that I love about this book that I would like you to just spend a couple more minutes on is the uncritical faith in capitalism, which mirrors the uncritical faith of Marxists who, you talk about that in the last couple of chapters, where people said, the communist revolution is, things have gone the way they're supposed to go, and it's that blinders because of creeds, which do not allow people to see what's happening right before their very eyes. So wondering if you could speak
well, it's kind of a cliche to say that the extremes echo one another, and so I don't think it's that they echo one another organically. I think that the American right deliberately models itself after the communists from a long time ago, and you find evidence for this here and there. One of the right-wing groups I was following was actually reading a book by a British communist, where they were trying to mimic the kind of party discipline and everything of. Yeah, and Grover Norquist has used to. God, was it Lenin that he quoted, or was it Brezhnev or something like this? But they used to turn to these guys all the time. And there's also there's a way in which they mimic the idea of historical determinism, and when I said about NAFTA being a no-brainer, that's kind of a hint of it. This idea that markets are unfolding in a certain way, and certain things are inevitable, certain things are going to happen, and other things can't possibly be rescued, and they just have to go. And the dialectic of history is unfolding, and we are just little, leaves in the current, of history. And you definitely get this sense with the right wingers, with the sort of the conservative movement. I'm trying to remember what I said about Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand is one of the most interesting people. Can I just tell you a story? So the book came out in German. I told you guys heard this one already. The book came out in German, and I went on a book tour over there, and I would lecture in English because I don't sprechen. But the part of my lecture that would get the audience every time, no matter what city in Germany I was in, was when I would talk about Ayn Rand, the American novelist. They weren't familiar with her. In fact, her novels have only recently been published over there. But this is the woman who wrote Atlas Shrugged. Did I mention this before? You see people reading it on the subway in Washington. Every Republican is reading Atlas Shrugged. And this is a book about an inverse Great Depression. It's about a Great Depression that is brought on by, rather than the real depression that we actually had in the 30s, this is a Great Depression brought on by too much government intervention in the economy. And instead of the strikers being like the CIO or something like that, do you guys know what the CIO was? Okay, organized labor. Instead of the strikers being, there is a strike, and it's a strike of the billionaires. The billionaires go on strike, and they bring the world to its knees. And it's the story of an industrial cataclysm brought on in this way. And the reason this book was familiar to the Germans is because she is a Nietzschean. The idea of the Übermensch, the overman, the man who is beyond human, who is above our species. And this is an idea that she takes directly from this philosopher in Germany who no one reads anymore. So the Germans were all like, this stuff is sort of familiar, but I can't put my finger on it, on why it's familiar. And I'd say, it's Nietzsche. It's real bad. But this is very popular with the Republicans. But she also echoes a lot of communist doctrine in there as well. She herself came from the Soviet Union and was brought up in the early Stalin years and learned to admire that kind of idea of the historical determinism, that total, what would you call, like mechanical idea of history, and humans caught up in that. Anyhow, fascinating stuff. I hope you. Oh God, I'm exhausted. The brain is empty. Well, thank you for reading it. Okay. Yeah, I should.
Cookies, brownies.
Yes.
Oh, okay, good, awesome.
For the subway ride home.
Comes to some of the other events.
I've loved journalism.
Yeah, I'm just gonna go back. Watch some TV.
Enough now.
Yeah, that was a bad one. It was real bad.
Thank you very much.
Sir.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Oh.
It's going to sound easier as a writer.